Osionigata, Jeff Ganohalidoh, Corntassel, Dagwadoa, Shalagi, Yetli, Gwenasai. So hello everyone, my name is Jeff Corntassel, I'm from Cherokee Nation, and welcome to another episode of Frontlines Are Everywhere, the podcast that looks at Indigenous internationalism and the ways that we express our self-determining authority across Turtle Island and beyond. So I'm so pleased to have Mique'l Dangeli here today, and I'm going to read a short bio and hopefully get some of the pronunciations correct. Born and raised in Metlakatla, Alaska, Annette Islands Indian Reserve. Dr. Mique'l Dangeli is from the Ts'msyen Nation. She is a dancer, choreographer, Sm'algyax, language learner and teacher and curator. Her work in Indigenous visual and performing arts focuses on protocol, sovereignty, resurgence, decolonization, Indigenous research methodologies, critical curatorial studies, repatriation, and language revitalization. Mique'l is also an elected board member of the Native American Art Studies Association. Her current book, which I think we'll talk about later, focuses on the work of Ts'msyen photographer Benjamin Alfred Haldane, who lived from 1874 to 1941 and opened a studio in Metlakatla, Alaska in 1899. So welcome, Mique'l, and can you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Afternoon, Jeff. Thank you. Sm Łoodm Nüüsm duayu, Metlakatla, lagi takwan, de wotwatgu, lachiskig, diptegu, ada gispatlot, diwon nat aslu, nawaps nasawab, diwol sawatgu. Upsam nokwot oyak sat noon the wom gwa sayawun. In Sm'algyax, I said that my name is Sm Łoodm Nüüsm. I'm of the Eagle Clan of Metlakatla, Alaska. I am also of the House of Nisawalp. My tribe is the Gispatlot, Tsimsyen. I'm Tsimsyen. And I just thank you for your invitation to be here today to visit with you.
Łoodm for being part of this conversation today. And really to start, this is a question that we ask most guests, and it's really about Indigenous internationalism, this concept that we've been toying with, and it's really nothing new. It's about the ways that we express our self-determination that transcend state borders, the ways that we trade with each other, the ways that we relate to each other, the ways that we relate to animal nations and the plant nations. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about Indigenous internationalism. Does that term resonate with you? Is that something that you find useful as a discussion around our diplomacies and our protocols?
I think the term Indigenous internationalism resonates with me deeply because of our ancient and ongoing nation-to-nation relationships with peoples all over the world globally, as well as, you know, our relatives of all, I would say all ways of being. So some people say two-legged and four-legged, but for us, within our worldview as Tsimsyen people and Sm'algyax-speaking people, so including the Niska and the Gitxsan, we also, our beliefs in beings that not everyone can see, our Nach and our worldview through our halait. And so I think about those ancient, since time immemorial, ongoing exchanges that have allowed for us to really be able to live in the Ganohalidoh, the world that we do today, from those that gave us water to those that gave us the tides, those that gave us the sun, moon, and stars, all of the ways that those relationships happened in through building over a long period of time and understanding the importance of those origin stories, but also continuing the teachings of those, our Adauch, our ancient history, so that the what I would say, the way that I would use Indigenous internationalism is with that focus rather than the way that internationalism is taken up through coloniality, which is this idea of the separate countries that hold, that their governance isn't an ancient governance. It's a new governance, and it's a governance of oppression and marginalization and the taking away of rights. Not that, so I think that that's a misnomer in a lot of ways for the understanding of Indigenous internationalism, is to think of it in terms of the way that colonialism has structured this idea of, for example, of me being an international Indigenous person in this country.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, I think about how it's an alternative to these boundaries of control, these boundaries of coercion that are often enforced by state borders, right?
I would say attrition.
And attrition, yes.
As well, yeah. Termination, exploitation.
Violence, right? All of these things. And such a distinct, kind of difference from boundaries of care and inclusion.
Yeah, care, consideration, relationship building, Ts'msyen is how we say respect in our language. And that's the primary law, our ayauch, our ways is based on Ts'msyen. And that lack of it that you see in terms of colonial concepts of internationalism, it's very much exclusionatory.
Yeah, my goal is not so hidden. It's to really highlight Indigenous perspectives on internationalism and how those are meaningful in our everyday lives.
Yeah, one example that I give quite often is that, so the potlatch ban in Canada being from 1884 to 1951, when on the Northwest Coast here, when political activists like Chief Dan George, for example, started these early dance groups, the recognition of territory between and these public performances that were happening just before the potlatch ban was dropped, that what we do now after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in terms of acknowledging territory, that is an ancient practice that has now been adopted by colonial institutions, that seeing it within the framework of dance groups, which is my ongoing research and my lived experience as a dancer and choreographer, that's this idea of settlers having to do something, like being forced to do something, when actually we're just saying, just be respectful, just be kind and polite, and acknowledge the history that exists before this colonial state.
Yeah, and I think you're so right, there's a form of diplomacy that we practice. If I'm on your territory or if you're on my territory, you acknowledge that and you walk carefully. I've always been, there's a careful way of walking respectfully on other people's territories.
We say that in our language. Yeah, hagoyen, walk softly, walk carefully. Yeah.
Yes. Another reason why I love our language so much, all of our languages. You've had a lot of experience, and we'll get to some of the border, the colonial border experiences, but who are some of the people that inspire you in your everyday life? People that are, and it could even be non-human entities that inspire you to do the work that you're doing.
It would have, my first inspiration, I'd say, was my grandmother. Being matrilineal, so this is my mom's mom, and where I inherit every part of my being as a Ts'msyen woman from. But knowing that in her time as being sent away at 4 years old to boarding school, so different in the States, as you're from the States as well, being sent away to boarding school at 4 years old, and her first language was Sm'algyax, and that was taken from her through her the violence that she experienced at Sheldon Jackson Boarding School in Sitka, Alaska, that she utilized that colonial system to then become a cook in Chemawa, another boarding school. She became a cook there, and while becoming like an assistant to the cooks, she went and she got her business degree.
Amazing.
Yeah, amazing. And she would always talk about how they'd give her like the biggest brown paper bag. Like she'd walk into her business school with like the leftovers from the boarding school in this big brown bag. And then she went on during World War II. I have such a love for Rosie the Riveter because my grandmother wasn't a riveter, her sister was. And she delivered blueprints in the hangar, in the airplane hangar, on roller skates with a shopping cart.
Wow. It's innovation, right?
Yeah, bringing these huge blueprints to those that were building the airplanes while her sister was climbing in the wings to do the riveting. And I just, these stories of our matriarchs and their ability to take these colonial systems and turn it on their heads. And with that business degree, my grandmother, opened multiple stores in our community, and a restaurant, a candy shop. She was our town treasurer. She sold the Seattle Times, by pulling it on a wagon behind her. And this is our small island community. It's the last island on the panhandle of Alaska. At the time, the population, when she was doing all that, was probably about 800. It was under 1,000 people. And just hearing her stories made me, and she was also an oral historian, so she gave me my foundation of my knowledge of my community's history through the perspective of her grandfather. So it was really such an order that my grandfather this is her grandfather, so this is my great-great-grandfather. It was like that generation was alive when I was growing up because of her ability as an orator. So I wanted to make my own stories. I wanted to go and have my own travels and to seek my education. And she would always tell me, "You're so lucky." And I didn't understand that until I was older, realizing the opportunities that were afforded to me that weren't afforded to her generation. And then she started speaking Sm'algyax to me after I pursued learning while I was going to the University of Washington. She was spoke Sm'algyax to other speakers, her sisters primarily, her first cousins, but didn't teach me until she knew I was safe to learn.
Okay, yeah.
And that was through my success at university. And unfortunately, it was just 4 years before she died, but I at least was able to learn a lot from her. So I'd say that my grandmother is still my inspiration today.
Such a powerful matriarch.
Her name was Corinne Reeve, by the way.
Okay. Yeah.
Her maiden name was Lang, Corinne Lang.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Well, let's turn to a point at which you really were struggling to enter your own territory, and which is bisected by the colonial U.S.-Canadian border. And it wasn't that long ago, right? And so,
Yeah.
And I just have a quote from you. At one point you stated, in terms of citizenship, I'm Tsimshian. I'm not U.S., I'm not Canadian, I'm Tsimshian. I only recognize the border because it's forced upon us. And, the ways in which your nation has been bisected by this colonial border. You were born and raised, of course, on Annette Island, Reserve in Metlakatla, Alaska, which is, from my understanding, the only Tsimshian community outside of Canada. But Canada sees you as non-status because you're not registered in the Canadian system. So can you share with us? I know this is kind of painful, probably, to recount some of this, but and you brought in a newspaper article that was from as July 1st, 2018. I won't be celebrating on Canada Day.
Well, yeah, that was published in the province. Dangeli won't be celebrating Canada Day. And that's because in 2018, I was to be deported from Canada on Canada Day. To go back, my community, Metlakatla, Alaska, and Metlakatla, British Columbia, are the same people. We were divided through the process of colonization of what has become British Columbia and what has become Alaska. Our people were denied our land rights, specifically to Metlakatla, British Columbia, in 1886 under Judge Bagby. And our people made the decision to go to the U.S. side of our territory to pursue our land rights under what was becoming, because Alaska was a territory, what was becoming the territory of Alaska. Alaska didn't become a state until 1959. So I feel that our ancestors made the right decision, because under their persistence, their advocacy to the elected officials at the time, we became the Annette Island Indian Reserve under an act of Congress in 1891. And that's inclusive of 86,000 acres of land, so our entire island and the island circumferencing our main island, and the 86,000 acres of land, and then the water outside of our community, 300 feet of water outside of our community, which is our fishing grounds. So that to have our land and our water rights, to have 86,000 acres of land and 3,000 feet of water outside the circumference of our island is not something that exists for our people on the BC side still today.
Wow.
So I growing up in our community with my great-grandfather, Charles Brendable, was our first mayor of our community, and then my grandmother serving on our tribal council. So our community, our council is both it's both a municipality and a tribal government. So when you're mayor, it's like being elected band chief here.
Okay.
Then my mom being on tribal council and being having the longest standing seat as a councilwoman in our community's history. So sovereignty, talks of sovereignty without saying the word sovereignty were everyday conversations, and both at my grandmother's kitchen table and my kitchen table at my mom and dad's, because we were always talking about our land rights, our fishing rights. My mom is still on council and fighting to maintain our rights under the current administration. And so growing up as a member of a federally recognized tribe and growing up on our reserve, I didn't have the vocabulary of status and non-status until I moved here. And I moved here in 2004 to start my master's at the University of British Columbia. And when I went through the visa process, I just thought, well, this is something that all students have to do. I didn't really think of it as a citizenship issue until I started school and started realizing my distinct difference, that I couldn't believe I was non-status. At that time, I was 24 years old. I was like, I'm status, But then coming to recognize that the Canadian government don't recognize federal registration in the U.S. So it escalated because I went right from my master's to my PhD. So living under visas the entire time and not really questioning the process until coming into this place of having a postgraduate work visa that was not, what do I do if I'm no longer a student? How do I continue to live my life here? By that time, I'd lived here for, well over a decade. And my postgraduate work visa, that's the one that was to expire on Canada Day of 2018. I could not get another visa. I just couldn't. And I didn't understand why, because I had a Canadian MA, I had a Canadian PhD, I'm highly specialized in terms of teaching Sm'algyax. That in itself, you have to argue to hire somebody that is not American by their specialized skill. And what it came down to initially, to rewind a little bit, in 2016, I was a professor, assistant professor of Alaska Native Studies at the University of Alaska Southeast in Juneau. And we had a lot of first language fluent speakers die within a short period of time. And I just realized that in order for me to really do the work that I want to do for our language, this is the last opportunity to work with our mother tongue speakers, most of whom live in our territory on the BC side. So I left my job at UAS and I started to work at Naaqsagillikill School, which is a on-reserve, Sm'algyax-focused Tsimshian school in the Kitsum-Kalem Reserve. And I was recruited by Dr. Margaret Anderson, who's our longest-standing linguist, to teach in the Sm'algyax Fluency Program, the certificate program that is specifically certifies teachers to teach Sm'algyax within school districts in our territory. And I could not get the government to give me a visa beyond the postgraduate work visa. So, and through that process, because when you fill it out online, it's all drop boxes. Whatever your answer that you put in on the immigration application, the drop boxes will respond. Initially, it had to do with my NOC number, which is the NOC number is essentially a value that the Canadian government gives to different types of employment here in Canada. They don't value K through 12 teachers, and that was my full time. I was the head of the Sm'algyax program, developing K through 12 Sm'algyax, teaching the EAs to teach Sm'algyax so that when I left the room, it didn't evacuate the language. The language became a part of classroom management, everyday activities. We're building progress towards an immersion school. And then at the UNBC position that I had, which was an adjunct position, I was being hired per course that the program needed to complete. I taught half the courses in that program.
Like a session, was it kind of a sessional?
Yeah, like a sessional.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a full-time university position.
Yeah.
So I had a really low NOC number because I was a K through 12 teacher. And on top of that, every time my husband, Mique'l Dangeli, and I were married in 2011. There's nowhere on the immigration application to identify as being Indigenous. So when my husband was, like me, born in the U.S., except his difference is that he has status. He's a status Indian. His family is Niska and Tsimshian. He's registered with Ganohalidoh, which is the last Niska village on the Nass River. So this drop-down box would always ask, they would see that Mike is American, and then there was no way to say that he's here on his Indian status. He's got the right to live here as an Indian, as a status Indian. And then as I was starting to realize that it was going to be that the immigration process was going to take away my ability to do this critical Sm'algyax work for our people at the K through 12 level, I came into a place of like, well, what else can I do? And it really was about every time I taught Sm'algyax at UNBC, because it was like individual contracts, like sessional work, right? Individual contracts for each class. I would have to leave Canada, come back through the border with all my paperwork, and sit at the border and get processed. There used to be a ferry that went between Ketchikan and Prince Rupert, and I was processed at that border, and it was the first time, like, it seemed like in a decade they'd processed anybody, because everyone gets processed at the Vancouver border, and I thought it would just be easier because I'm Tsimshian. They see Tsimshian people all the time, and their printer was so old that the ink didn't even adhere to my face. It looked like I forged the ones I was teaching at UNBC.
Right.
Like it just didn't stick.
Oh no.
And so, this is like, I had gone through so much that we'd hired multiple lawyers in terms of the way that First Nations law, Indian Act does not communicate with immigration. So all of the laws and policies in Canada, there's the place that people think it comes together is through the Jay Treaty. And so to have people throw up the Jay Treaty all the time, I don't understand why you're having such an issue, just use the Jay Treaty. But as you know, the Jay Treaty is unidirectional.
Exactly.
If you're a status Indian, you can go to the U.S. and you can live and work there under the Jay Treaty, but of course, because the U.S. is so hyper-focused, obsessed on blood quantum, that they're like, wait, are you 50%? And then they use that to say, oh, there you go, you can come over on this side and live your life. But there's no reciprocation. So sometimes I hear it say codified, but Canada didn't do either of those things. It's the same thing. They did not codify the Jay Treaty, so it's not reciprocal. So in this time where everyone is talking about, immigration policies, and at the time that I was going through this, the border wall was, because Trump, this was just during his first go around as president, there was all of this talk about the border wall between the U.S. and Mexico. And what I was encountering and what I was and still trying to make apparent to anyone really who will listen is that Canada has a border wall that is specifically for Indigenous people. I call it Canada's Indigenous Border Wall, and it is meant to export us through the Jay Treaty. And if you fall in love and you have children over there, your kids have no right to come back and live here. So essentially, you get stuck on that side. And if you're a person who is indigenous to what is territories that have become Canada, but you happen to be born on that side, you can't come here and live your life like your relatives who are born on this side. So there's the way that, the immigration laws and policies are on this one hand, and Indian Act and treaty are on this other. And they're manipulating the lives of Indigenous people without knowing what the other hand is doing. And for me, it meant that I was almost deported, and nobody could figure it out. Nobody could untangle it, because I had so many lawyers say, I'll take this case up pro bono, because they were so excited by it, because it's also inclusive of the Nisga'a Treaty.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
My husband is Nisga'a. So in 2000, the Nisga'a ratified their treaty. It's one of the modern treaties first modern treaties in BC's history. And when I would try to figure out how in this application do I say, not only is he a status Indian, but he's got the rights to live here through the Nisga'a Treaty. Nisga'a Treaty, my husband should have all the rights of a Canadian citizen. So he, when he was in high school, when he became of working age, so just prior to high school, he applied for his SIN number with his status card, got his SIN number, and he was working as a fisherman and a diver between Prince Rupert all the way up to Gingolith to Ketchikan, all the way through the territories that are inclusive of our waterways. And so his SIN number doesn't expire. But when I went to put him on my application, and this was under the consultation of Nathan Cullen, who was an MLA of Terrace Bulkley Valley at the time, because I couldn't figure out why my application, I just couldn't even submit it. It was rejected twice, and that's a whole other story. So I couldn't even submit it because it wouldn't allow me to fill out these drop boxes. So with Mike, specific to Mike, I was told by Nathan Cullen's office, Francois Guilloden was his secretary at the time, as administrative assistant. She said she was told by immigration that I need to claim that Mike was a landed immigrant. So I couldn't even get like the word landed immigrant like past my lips to tell Mike.
That's so alien, right?
Yeah, it's so alien. It's so demoralizing. It's dehumanizing. And Mike's great-grandfather, Sm'algyax Chief Charlie Barton, was the first with the first Nisga'a delegation to travel to Ottawa to fight for Nisga'a land claims. When they do their timeline for the Nisga'a Treaty, the first thing you see is a photo with his great-grandfather in it. And here we were being told by Canada that Mike is a landed immigrant when he is a registered Nisga'a under the Nisga'a Treaty, when he's a status Indian. And under the Nisga'a Treaty, he's supposed to have all of the rights of a Canadian citizen. So he tried to sponsor me into the country just after we got married. That went nowhere.
Nothing. There was no recognition of that.
There was no recognition.
Wow.
They were given citizenship cards, which many people back east are really familiar with, it's being citizens of their nation. And we would use it just like he would use his status card at the border. He'd tuck it into his passport and use it as he was traveling back and forth. The very first time he went to use that citizenship card after it was issued, the person looking at it, the border guard, he said, "Did you make that yourself?" And he right away just assumed that this was some fraudulent ID that he had made. He jokes around about it, saying it's just as useful as a Blockbuster card. It doesn't see the border. It doesn't exist, right? And Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore as a franchise. So we were getting detained at the border quite often before this even started because of my husband's the precarious situation to put my husband in, being an American-born Nisga'a. And so being an American-born Ts'msyen, the student visa, if I was traveling without him, would get me through pretty easy until it didn't, until they wouldn't issue a work visa. So I couldn't figure out, when I thought we finally turned it in, and then it was rejected, and I had Nathan Cullen's office look into it, it was because I did not take their English exam. So
that's outrageous.
It's outrageous when I've written my PhD in English. It's not like I'm going to school back east where I'm writing it in French at UBC. I wrote my MA thesis in English. And so I just killed multiple messengers because I just was like, when Nathan's Cullen office, when they told me this, I was like, I realize you're the messenger, but I speak English because over a 150-year time span, our people were brutally forced to speak English through, sexual, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual abuse, some of whom lost their lives in those colonial institutions that are referred to as Indian residential school. Those were not schools.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I'm teaching Sm'algyax in my people's territory. I have 80 students, K through 12, and another 40 students in my community program in Kitsillas and Kitsim-Kalem, and another 25 students at the University of Northern British Columbia. And some of these students are residential school survivors who are coming back into their language knowledge. And I'm being told I have to take an English exam to do this work. And so I did it. It was $500. It's all a cash grab.
So you had to pay to take this colonial
I had to pay to take this exam.
English language test.
And luckily it was during Hobiye, Nisga'a Lunar New Year's ceremony, so I had the balance of our ceremonies to help me deal with this. I literally left the Peony Forum where it happens in Vancouver, and I went down the hill to downtown, took the bus, and just was I was considering just keeping my regalia on and going down there and taking it in my regalia, but I didn't want that energy on my regalia. So I went there and I took the exam, and then I came back up the hill and danced all that energy off and regained my strength through our ceremonies, and had something to turn in. But the second time it was denied. So the first time was the English exam. It was denied because I didn't have that part of the paperwork, and the second time it was because of Mike. Because they couldn't figure out how he was in Canada. How dare he be in Canada? The multiple colonial ironies that are there is that Mike is sent all over the world to represent Canada as an artist. We were in 2017, we spent a summer in Inami, Japan, where he took a gold medal for Canada in an international carving expo in Inami. And they called him Canada's son. Like the whole village, right? Like we're constantly being asked to represent Canada. And in the year that I gave my keynote on this in 2019, the Canadian consulate had hired us to speak and to perform and to do collection consultations at the Booth Museum in Georgia, like the Canadian consulate. So this is what I spoke to the Canadian consulate about it, and of course, nothing was done. So I feel like I've been deported from my people's traditional territory. I would not have left full-time Sm'algyax teaching at N'Axagilakil, at the University of Northern British Columbia, at the community learners groups in Ts'msyen and Kitsilas, if I wasn't under threat of deportation. I left conventional academia and focused on our Tsimshian academia, which is our language. But I had no choice. It was really out of desperation that I started, desperation to stay in this country, because I gave birth to my son in October 23rd of 2019, my 5-year-old, and I was like, I have no energy to continue this battle, and I don't want to go through this with my little one. It was bad enough that the hardest times of this battle was when I was pregnant with him.
I can't even imagine the challenges.
I was definitely clinically depressed. I was just, it felt like a death sentence. Like, we have a dance group here, the Ganohalidoh. We've taught 4 generations of dancers that, to be now teaching the grandchildren of the kids that we started with, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it was devastating, heartbreaking to leave our elders, the children, especially our first language speakers. But I applied for a position at the University of the Fraser Valley and moved to Stalo territory, and that's what kept me here.
Yeah. Such a powerful story. It shows your resilience, but it also shows, the convergence of all these colonial impositions. And, and I was just thinking, and just for the listeners, the Jay Treaty 1794 basically signed into existence, and the design was to allow us to cross freely back and forth across the U.S.-Canadian border. And Canada, as you mentioned, does not recognize it. So it's not, I've heard it mentioned as statutory law. So in the U.S. it has statutory law or statutory legal significance. But, even then, you've got to prove 50% blood quantum or more to be able to work and live in the U.S. And so, what a gripping story. Do you see? Has anything even changed? I mean,
I think the change
Yeah.
has come how you and I reconnected,
Yeah.
because we had seen each other in passing at the NASA conference for many years. But when you and I were brought together with a panel of Indigenous scholars and lawyers by Canadian immigration to talk about Indigenous mobility. It was a Zoom meeting, that was like 3 years ago now, or
I remember that.
or
That was so
more.
strange.
It was super strange. We were trying to get them to they just couldn't go beyond mobility. Just the idea that, oh, they should be able to go back and forth easily. And there was no emphasis on living and working on the Canadian side. There was hunting. Like we'll give you rights to hunt and then you can bring it back to the U.S., but it wasn't about the real issues at hand, about families, about communities, about our cultural practices, our languages. And, there was nothing about, the process was so dehumanizing that there's, it's not about the name that I carry, the rights and responsibilities that I have, that our potlatch laws, none of that. It's one colonial institution that is just enforcing the other one in terms of the ways that even the lack of acknowledgement of the Niska Treaty, the lack of the continued discrepancy in terms of the ways that the Jay Treaty does not work in the opposite direction. I think that I was proud to be a part of that conversation in the way that it just felt like hopeful. My lawyer was on as well. She was actually, as you can imagine, he got pretty burnt out on something like this. It was really nice to have her on the call with me. And, she saw the injustice immediately. She recognized it and was apologetic all throughout the process. But, the time that I was like, when the last time that I came through the Prince Rupert Ketchikan border, I was 7.5 months pregnant with my son. And it took them an hour and a half or 2 hours to process. And I was like laying on my back on the floor with my big pregnant belly. And she was on the phone with me. She was on the phone with me the entire time. I didn't want my son to be born on the U.S. side because I didn't want him to go through what we're going through.
Makes sense.
That he can be, if we decide, and we haven't, we're going to let him to decide he can be an American citizen born abroad. But it's really interesting in this time period that we're in right now that I feel like I'm in the place where my ancestors were in 1887, in that I'm making the decision now to be here because I don't want to live under that colonial rule. And that's what my ancestors decided. I don't want to live under Canadian colonial rule. And I don't want to live under the U.S. colonial rule.
Yeah. It's such a challenging decision, too, even to know, which colonial regime do you choose.
It is. And my husband is a veteran. He's spent 10 years as a U.S. Army Airborne Ranger, 3 tours of combat. And before Trump was in office, when we would travel back and forth under various administrations, he would always be called an expat because he's a U.S. veteran living in Canada. And some of that would mean that we would get hassled and detained on the U.S. border saying, essentially, why isn't the U.S. good enough for you? And so we would travel together, and so, well, you know, at the time I was his girlfriend, my girlfriend's going to school over here, you know, we'd just kind of backpedal in ways to say that, you know, we haven't decided where we're going to live our lives fully. But now, as you know, we've received travel advisories as Canadian professors, as Canadian scholars, academics, about going into the U.S. And those travel advisories is one of the reasons I'm on your podcast now, is that why I would, you know, want to talk about all of this again, is that now I'm in a place where I don't feel comfortable traveling into the U.S., a place of my colonial citizenship, because the first thing that any border agent will see is my name in immigration battle if you Google my name. So that, to the U.S. government at this time, is anti-American. Why would I work so hard to live in Canada? Why would I go through a Canadian immigration battle?
There's just no understanding of nationhood in the sense of Indigenous nationhood and connection to community. It's them or us.
Mm-hmm, exactly. It's all of the exact opposite of Indigenous internationalism that we've talked about. And it's one of the reasons why we would, rather than push back, we would just kind of bring it to another topic to say, well, I'm going to school, or, you know, well, you know, I'm considering, you know, going on further with my education, rather than, because those moments when you're in a position to educate colonial authorities, especially as Indigenous people, especially as a woman, I feel, are the times that you are most vulnerable. Yes. Because they're in the position to keep you out, to take your passport and to not allow you back and have no way to enter Canada again. Right now, there's no way, if the U.S. decides that they're going to keep you out of the country, you can't take that to like a secondary court of law. There's no place where you can fight that. So we're, you know, my mom, my sister, they all live in Metlakatla, nieces and nephews, aunties and uncles. You know, I'm related to over half the island of 1,200 people, and I just don't feel like it's safe for us to travel through.
I'm with you, and I'm just back from Oklahoma, so from Cherokee territory, and it feels, and some of my relatives have said this too, feels like the 1830s in terms of the tone, anti-Indigenous sovereignty, you know, anti-Indigenous sentiment, and it's a challenging time. I you know, and you must feel this too. I feel a small part of what you're feeling is, you know, my family's there. Yeah. And so I need to reconnect for ceremony. I need to reconnect for all these different things. And when it doesn't feel safe, what do you do?
Yeah. We were all going to go home in August. Our ceremonies are typically like the first 2 weeks of August. And the ceremony, a big ceremony that I'm a part of, was postponed till next year. And I just breathed such a huge sigh of relief. Sad, you know, that our son Michael and our granddaughter Raina, who's just a year old, lives in Metlakatla, that we won't be able to see them this year. And but at the same time, it's just, you know, you hope that things are going to get better. And it's like, maybe things will be different by the time it's time to go home again. And, you know, but some of I'm sure you read some of the questions that we should be prepared to ask on that advisory.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was strange to read.
It was super strange. Like, we were essentially told, without saying burner phones, you know, we're being advised to carry phones that we're temporary phones with no information on it, and to leave all of our tech behind, to be ready to answer questions about gender ideology, about climate change, and about, you can tell I studied, right?
Nothing about environmental justice.
Nothing about environmental justice. Also about like how our work promotes the U.S. Like we're all doing work to say that the U.S. is, the lead in everything. So, all of that stuff. I don't know if anyone did you talk to anybody at NASA that had to answer these questions coming through the border?
A few people felt that they were sidelined, right, and taken for additional questioning because of some of those questions, right, around their indigeneity, around their activism or perceived activism, and so it's like you said, there's no place more vulnerable than being in between these colonial systems. It feels like in between, but even though you're enmeshed in one. Yeah. And you can be in this place where you can be sent back, or you can be detained, or you can be sent forward. And it's just really a challenging place, considering that our ancestors have been crossing these borders for generations. Yes. And they found different ways to do that. I talked to some Blackfoot folks who said they would say it's an Indian ceremony, and that was the key word. But they also had relationships with the customs officers there, so they knew what they were doing. Right? There was a cordiality that you don't see now. Right? When I crossed into Washington recently, the border guard said, we should build a wall right here at the U.S.-Canadian border. And, and yeah, there is a wall. And then he said we should get rid of this stupid peace park. And I don't think this person would have said that 6 months before. Yeah. Right? There's kind of people feel emboldened to say these things that are right near the surface, and we know there's kind of this anti-women, anti-indigenous, even diversity that we see that's now just hidden beneath the surface that now is coming forward. And it was always there, but it's now being celebrated in such a strange way, almost back to a different form of isolation or feeling of isolation. Absolutely. Where we don't feel like we can connect. Yeah. And it's not a pandemic of a particular disease, I would say a pandemic of racism.
It is a pandemic of racism, and it's just as dangerous.
White supremacy.
Yeah. It's just as dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, for sharing that. That's not easy to relive that, and then also to see the current geopolitical situation and see how it's affecting all of us.
Oh, I was just thinking about the timeline in terms of figuring out a ways to stay in this country. When Trump got into office, and the first time I was in my first semester in my new position at UAS, and I knew then that if I didn't go back in the window of my visa, that I wasn't sure how else I would be able to get back, but I would never have thought that it wouldn't be until 2021. So that was 2017. So it's been a long, arduous battle, and Ts'msyen my family already goes back to Ts'msyen, so I'm a Ts'msyen band member. So I'm a band member, but I'm not a status Indian. They made they were so amazing. They made a short doc that was like, what would it be like for you if Mique'l were to be taken away from the community? And it was really about, at the time I was the only Sm'algyax teacher in that, from Ts'msyen on over to Kitsilas. So I think what the pandemic, though, in terms of bringing it back to the pandemic, what the pandemic taught me was that I can do the work of Sm'algyax revitalization from anywhere. And I had to make the decision to okay, I can keep this up online. I just need to find a way through this colonial system that will increase my knock number to keep me in the country. 6 weeks after I accepted my job at my post at the University of the Fraser Valley, 6 weeks my permanent residency card came in. Because one of the highest knock numbers you could have in this system that they use to evaluate our worth is to be a tenure track professor at a Canadian institution. So that was the key. And so now I'm still a permanent resident, and I expire in 27.
Okay.
So 2 years from now. And am definitely considering Canadian citizenship.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Swear my devotion or whatever to the king.
Yeah. I wonder if you can bypass that.
And then one of the hardest things that my lawyer had to tell me, because this is going to be ongoing if I don't do this, is that I need to sponsor Mike into the country.
Incredible.
In order for us to have the full rights of Canadian citizens. He can't, even though he votes in Canada, pays his taxes, has a SIN number that doesn't expire, all of that in order to round this all out for us just to live our lives fully here, I have to sponsor him.
It's so strange. Wow. Yeah, and I think, this is ongoing. Like you said, the permanent resident card expires, right? You have other decisions you have to make that are colonial decisions, right? To how to navigate this system that's designed to erase us, essentially. Yeah.
Termination, extermination. If I didn't have my PhD, I know that I wouldn't be here.
Yeah, and we wouldn't be we'd have this conversation by Zoom or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So accepting this position at UVic, which has just this is the end of my first academic year, right?
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. I'm the first Indigenous hire in the Department of Art History and Visual Studies. And I have to say, there's a lot of vindication in this. I feel I feel vindicated in terms of everything tells you in this colonial system, this gamut that I've been through, tells you that you're not enough, that you're not worthy. Doesn't matter. You're still an Indian. Doesn't matter if you have your PhD. Your language doesn't matter. All of these ways it tells you you do not matter. The work you do does not matter. To have a tenure track position at the University of Victoria and to be working closely with the Indigenous Education Department to build a Sm'algyax program here at UVic. We're already, well on our way. We have students that are, eagerly waiting for these programs to happen.
Yeah, much needed. So it's coming back to where you started in some ways, like you may do immersion here, right, at the university level.
And Ts'msyen is involved. So Ts'msyen is the community that's going to be the base. So it's going to be both here in Victoria and in our territory. So it makes it feel like, when you wonder, why is this happening? Is it worth it? I know that with this platform, as with your platform, there's a responsibility. And the responsibility is to continue to educate people on these issues, because I'm definitely not the only one. There are so many people that have to live their lives elsewhere because they cannot make it through this colonial system, immigration.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons we started this podcast, is to really amplify people's stories and voices so that other people can learn from that. And also so that you can be able to tell that story without interference.
And I get the question all the time, how do you live here? By my own people. It's better than getting the question that I used to get, which is, aren't you that Ts'msyen woman that's supposed to be deported from Canada on Canada Day?
So this picture still comes up in their minds. as you're Googled by customs officers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was happening within our own territory, and I think that they were surprised to meet me, like, "Whoa, you're still here? Oh."
Well, shifting gears a little bit to some of your current research, and as I was thinking about some of your work on Indigenous copyright, one of my friends used to say, "Sharing is not taking." Mm-hmm. And she's a storyteller. She's Kiowa Apache, and she'd have people come up to her and say, "Hey, I want to use that story," and she'd say, "No, you're not. There's a certain protocol you use," and I listen to that story. Some people say you have to hear it a certain amount of times, or you're shared particular stories with family members through a particular process, and they give you permission. And so there's all these protocols that are often just ignored because of the publicly facing availability of a lot of our songs and a lot of our artistic expressions. And there's that danger of cultural appropriation. So I was wondering if you could talk about some of your current work, especially around dance and songs, and this notion of Indigenous copyright.
I actually tend to focus more on identity theft.
Okay, yes.
Because copyright to me doesn't really speak to the damage, the harm that is done when people who are not of that lineage, who don't have hereditary rights to those songs and dances, due to those who that song and dance is a formative to their identities. And it has been generationally for old songs, some going back to time immemorial, and then others more recently, because we have new songs composed every day, in our territories, new dances created. So you're taking the history that doesn't belong to you, and you're claiming a lineage that does not belong to you. So I tend to use the term identity theft.
Makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, because I think that where copyright, it doesn't have that direct connection to the identity of the owner.
Yeah, it's still kind of nested in almost Western intellectual property.
Intellectual property, yes.
Yeah.
What's more than that, I love the idea that sharing is not taking, because one thing that with our songs and dances here in the Northwest Coast through our potlatch system, when you're given a song, you're given the responsibility to convey the oratory that goes along with that song. So the songs and dances and the oratory, we get some performances, not a lot because we've done a lot to educate people. So not a lot lately. We've had our dance group for over 20 years. But when we first started out, we'd get certain people being like, "Can you talk less and sing and dance more?" They just want the singing, dancing Indians and all the stereotypes. And very shocked and almost put off by our ability to articulate ourselves using big words that they're not expecting. But that getting them to understand that the oratory is just as important as the song, and it's just as important as the dance, and to share where the song comes from. So who gave you the song, who wrote the song, why, what the relationship is. It really is about relationality. I talk about it in terms of relationscapes. So relationscapes being inclusive of the land and waterways. So when we think of landscapes, but this is a relationscape that is also between. It can be a nation to nation relationscape, and it might be nations to nations, plural relationscapes, community to community, and always inclusive of the lands and waterways, and in different ways. And so when you receive a song, it doesn't mean you could actually give it. You can't. Right? So that, because that relationality, the song being given to you, it stops there. unless there's like a specific, like, I'm giving you the song to give to others, which is very rare. It usually stops with that person.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, what for that. We're kind of nearing the end of our conversation. Just a couple more questions. This one's kind of a big one, but
Those other ones are pretty
the other ones are super tiny. This is like grandiose. When thinking about the ways that colonization's encroached on our everyday lives, what do the front lines of Indigenous resurgence and resistance look like for you?
I think that I love the title of your podcast because I absolutely 100% with my heart believe that frontlines are everywhere. My husband and I were very active in Idle No More. We were very active in direct action. And what I came to realize the first time that I was hired to teach Indigenous Studies, I taught Introduction to Critical Indigenous Studies at UBC. I was hired by Daniel Heath Justice.
Another Cherokee.
Yeah, you guys are awesome.
Yeah.
I was hired by Daniel Heath Justice, who was on my committee, my PhD committee, to teach in Indigenous Studies, which I never had thought would be an opportunity afforded to me. And I took it up, and I realized in that moment the huge responsibility that was my front line, that everything that I had done in terms of activism to that point, now essentially I have an audience whose job it is to learn from all of these life experiences, because I very much teach through life experiences. What is amazing about the time we live in is there's so much Indigenous filmmaking, especially, where you hear and you see what our people are going through. And I always, with a focus of how are you going to make changes? So when I taught at the University of the Fraser Valley, I also taught Intro to Critical Indigenous Studies there. I created an assignment that was called Finding Your Personal Calls to Action. And I have them read the 94 calls to action and pick 2 to build their research project upon. So to really reinforce this reconciliation, this time that we're living in, and I love teaching Indigenous studies, and I feel like my art history classes are very much like they're Indigenous studies through performing and visual arts. So filmmaking, music, visual art practices, everybody that I can bring in, and I absolutely love that work, and I've seen the ways it's transformative, and you have to make a lot of space for settlers to be unsettled and to come into this place of, I had no idea. And then also because at the University of Fraser Valley, the majority, the dominant language was Punjab. So to have international students that come to this country that truly believe there's no colonial history. Yes. Because when they go through their process of applying, it's different now that application has changed. For immigration, they're not taught anything or asked anything about residential school history. Yeah. They're not looking at the Indian Act, the potlatch ban. They're not looking at all of the ways that Indigenous people have been disenfranchised here. So that's also a part of it, right? And then the lived experience of Indigenous students in the room. And also creating safety in a way that giving room for practice, because it might be the first time people say these words out loud. How do you practice safely? So I think that my front line is definitely my classroom. Whatever classroom the university assigns me goes with us. And then also my front line is teaching my language, our songs, dance, and ceremonies. I hold dance practice here on campus every week. I would say about, really about half the dancers I have on the island are associated with UVic in different ways, whether they're alumni or they're staff here or they're current students. Yeah, it's been wonderful. There's no dance department here, so there's no dedicated space. So it's been interesting right now we're in the lobby of the Fine Arts Building, which is
Interesting.
tile floor. It was just tough. But the dean of the law dean has invited us to dance in the new Indigenous Law Building. So we're going to be performing, well, not performing, we're going to be practicing in there, but we're wanting to open up some opportunities for performances in that building. So another kind of frontline for me is always our language work, like that. I meet online with different language learning groups weekly, and I know that you have one more question, so I want to get to that question as well before I talk about the language projects.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we've already talked about some of the current projects. Are there some other current projects you'd like to discuss?
So I received a grant through Sealaska Corporation, which is based out of Juneau, Alaska. My uncle, who was my longest-standing Sm'algyax teacher, he passed away when he was 96 years old. It was actually the year that I accepted that position at University of Alaska Southeast, and where everything changed for me. He gave me the name Sm Łoodm Nüüsm for earning my PhD, which he told me also translates to Dr. Mique'l Dangeli. So that name is a part of our clan's house of names. And he did a puppet show with his wife in the 1970s that's completely in Sm'algyax. And I've with this grant money, it didn't have credits. It was just like a 10 episode series, and getting some really complex Sm'algyax usage. Like we have multiple counting systems that includes multiple counting systems, includes all of these complex ways of speaking to each other that are inaccessible to new learners because there's no subtitles, and there's also no credits. So my son, Mique'l Dangeli, is a filmmaker, graduated from the Indigenous Independent Digital Film Program at Capilano University. And so with the grant, we're creating multiple versions of it's Susie and Jimmy puppet show, as we refer to it. And so there'll be one with Sm'algyax subtitles, there'll be one with English subtitles, one with both, as well as a social media mini series. So we're launching on August 7th, which is our community's Founders Day. That's the day our ancestors came over to start a new community for us to thrive in, and they did that. So on August 7th, we are launching the Sm'algyax Teachings YouTube channel with these episodes, and as well as an Instagram with many episodes. And then I am not a TikTok user, which is going to make me sound really old, but he's going to teach me to start utilizing that technology as well, and of course Facebook. So I'm really excited about breathing new life into this incredibly rich resource of Sm'algyax language revitalization efforts that was put together by Arnold Booth and his wife Mary Eaton Booth, and he gave me these on VHS, almost like 2 decades ago now. So to finally have the opportunity to get them digitized, put his name on it, him and his wife's name on it for credit, and then to make it available to Sm'algyax learners all over. Mm-hmm. So that's my summer project. It's been a lot of fun, and
that's amazing.
And man, do I ever have a whole other appreciation for subtitles. Subtitles are the timing.
I have never made a film with subtitles, so I can't even imagine. Yeah.
It's been a really wonderful process to work with my son, who just became a dad 3 months ago. So we have our grandson over to the house while we're editing this work.
And there's so many different generations represented there. You've got your grandson, your son, your uncle, right?
Yeah.
And yourself. Like this, these generations are all converging around the language. Beautiful. Is there anything else we didn't talk about that you'd like to discuss?
No, I think that we have covered a lot. Yeah, I think that in terms of like just looking at, thank you for sharing your questions ahead of time. It gave me a lot of time to think, and maybe too much time because I know I was really escavach, as we say in our language, talkative at the beginning. Hopefully I had moments to take breaths in there.
No, well, there's a lot to this story, and I wanted to make sure you had time to share all the complexities.
I appreciate that. But, I think that this generation of, the generations who, I talked to my son about whether he considers himself a millennial or Gen X, but these upcoming generations give me so much hope in terms of, your question about what does Indigenous resistance and resurgence look like. I see it every day in my classroom by these students who are they're undergrads and they are so articulate and bold and speak truth to power as a part of a daily practice and in a way that I feel like, where social media, you see people say a lot of things that they wouldn't say if you talk to them in person. There's like you used to call them telephone tough guys back in the day. There's like the social media tough guys. But to see, especially, I have a lot of Indigenous women they're young, that are, I feel like this change that is going to happen in the next decade is really when we talk about, we're the dreams of our ancestors. Like I feel like that's the generation that is really going to solidify the changes that we've all made incrementally in much, much bigger ways. And very excited for the future in that way, and to be able to foster and witness the transformation that happens through this process and protect. I feel like I'm also there to help them navigate the coloniality that we can't keep them safe from. That's just a part of the process, unfortunate process of academia. But we're here.
We're here, and we're still, perpetuating this knowledge and the language and the teachings.
Yeah. And changing the institutions, hopefully. It seems like, I have to say, I'm very happy here at UVic. It feels like a dream at times. And I know that came through a lot of hard work by Indigenous scholars that came before me to make this place welcoming and a place where we can really do the hard work.
Well, I think on that note, Łoodm, thank you so much and for this great conversation, and more to come.
Yes.